All right, I'll hand him over. You know, one of the greatest days of my life was the day that I decided I didn't want to live anymore. I was done. I was tired. I was depressed. For those of you who know, I was bulimic. And for those of you who don't know, that's where you eat a bunch of food and then you throw it up because you're addicted to the endorphins that flood your body after puking. See, I had been writing my story, my grand life. Everything had been handed to me. Okay, I came from a stable home. My parents were married. We grew up in rural Montana. There wasn't crime. I had everything going for me. All right, I had a job. I was making more money than I was spending. I had family that loved me. You know, everything in my story seemed like I was set up for success, and instead I ruined it all through my choices because I couldn't see reality, and what looked good to me was actually killing me. And my story, 16, 17 years later, is one of a man who deserved nothing and who God gave everything to. My life right now is it's not perfect, but guys, it is so good compared to what it was because God changed my story. And for me, the pivotal moment came when I decided to give my story over to God and to let Him write it and to fill in the cracks of all the things that I had shattered. And that's hope for me, and I'm convinced that's hope for you and for the entire world, because if God can rescue a guy like me, He can rescue the rest of you. And this morning, we're going to be looking at the story of a bunch of people who make me look like a stained glass window. You think I'm broken? Let me tell you about the Israelites. Matthew's going to. And he's going to show how Jesus is the answer to the story that we've all been waiting for, all right? He is the one who fills in the cracks. He's the one who ends the story in search of an ending. Because if you've been here for a while, you know, over the last year or so, we've been going through the scriptures. In about 14 months, we covered 500 pages from Genesis 1 through the end of 2 Kings. Welcome to the book of Matthew. We're going to take the next 14 months and we're going to cover 44 pages. It's going to be awesome. We're going to take a long, slow walk in the story of Jesus. We're going to investigate who He is, what He had to say about Himself, the things that He did, and His identity, and how that changes our life and changes the history of the world. And Matthew is excited to share this story with us. I'm excited to share this story with all of you. So let's start with the genealogy. Yeah, I can hear your excitement. It's all right. I have something to help. I brought candy. There we go. Because rather than me tell you the story, you're going to tell me the story this morning. And while I practice what I'm going to say, I did not practice my throw very much. So the most memorable thing this morning might be the time that I hit one of you in the face with a Twix. All right, smile and eat it. It'll be okay. No, Matthew knows what's up. And while genealogies aren't necessarily that exciting to us, to the Jews they were. This is a history of a people told in very succinct fashion. For instance, if I was going to tell you the history of my life, I could just say this. I could say, I was born in Roseburg, I grew up in Montana, I moved back to Oregon after high school, and I've been in Portland since 2009. There you go. It's 36 years in about 12 seconds. All right, lists accomplish things. But Matthew begins this genealogy with, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And those are potent, powerful words for those who have eyes to see it, because Matthew is a Bible nerd. All right, you think I'm crazy about the scriptures? This guy puts me to shame, and it's one of my hopes in the next 14 months is just to drink deeply of the scriptures the way that Matthew is showing us. All right, my NIV Bible has a footnote. It says, this is an account of the origin. All right, it's an origin story, and there's two of them in chapter 1. We're covering one this week. We're going to do the next one next week, starting in verse 18. And in the Greek Bible, this phrase is already used twice, and only twice. Once in Genesis chapter 2:4, this is the account of the heavens and the earth. And once in Genesis 5:1, this is the account of the line of Adam. All right, Matthew is beginning his story much like John in his gospel, with reminding us of the beginning of God's creation work and His plan to bless all of humanity. Because the story of the Bible is that there's a good God who created a good world and then put humans in charge of it, and we messed it all up. Because we are looking at what things that look good to us instead of listening to God and what he has to say is good. But instead of giving up on this project called creation and on his human partners, God promised that one day he's going to rescue and redeem and restore all things, all right, through someone coming from the family line of Abraham, coming through the family line of David. And Matthew is saying that story that the Israelites have been waiting to come to fulfillment for over 1,000 years is happening in this person called Jesus, who is the Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One. So, here we go. Abraham was the father of Isaac. And we're all like, woohoo! But first of all, does anyone not know who Abraham is? Would you be willing to raise your hand? Okay, then you all are at least fairly biblically literate. That was a litmus test. Now, someone tell me something about Abraham.
He left the country of Ur.
Yes, he left the country of Ur. There you go. All right. Dodge away. I got more candy. Yes.
He and his wife couldn't have children.
That's right. He and his wife couldn't have children. Yes.
God promised to be the father of a great nation.
Yes, God promised he would be the father of a great nation, but they couldn't have kids. That was a big part of the story. Yes.
3 men came to visit him that told him that he would have a son.
Deep dive in Genesis 18. Absolutely. All right, we can keep going. Yes.
On his departure, Abraham was accompanied by his nephew Lot.
That's right. Yeah, accompanied by his nephew Lot. Okay, you guys will have to share. All right, now we can keep going because the Bible has 11 chapters to Genesis. Matthew gives the guy one word, but you remember the stories. Isaac. Anyone? All right, let me tell you about Isaac. Okay, no hands.
No, that is.
Oh, you raised your hand. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Isaac was the son who was to be sacrificed, but the Lord God Almighty saved him by providing with the sheep or ram.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. All right, I'm getting better on this throw too. Yeah, Isaac and the ram, this faithful story. Okay, Isaac was the father of Jacob.
And Esau.
He's not on the list. You don't get points. But Jacob, yeah, brother Esau. Okay. Anyone? Wrestled with God, yes.
Boy.
Yes.
His name is Trickster.
Yes, his name means trickster. The guy's a lion-cheating snake who deceived his blind dad into giving him the blessing. All right? But yeah, famous stories. Wrestled with an angel, saw a stairway ascending between heaven and earth. Now, guys, we are 3 out of 42. If you guys don't help me out telling this story. Okay. Yeah. All right, Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. All right? These guys. And Joseph was the favorite one. Remember the story at the end of Genesis. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. I'm going to ask you guys a question about Tamar in just a second. But first, I want to tell you something. You got to notice the details. All right? A genealogy looks boring, and it's pretty straightforward. Father to son to son to son to son. We are tracing someone's lineage. But there's a few key details in the story that, for those who have eyes to see it, are really significant. And people do this all the time, all right? As a case in point, let me show you a portrait of this man. All right, pop quiz. Does anyone know who this guy is?
Clinton.
Yeah. Yep. This is the portrait of President Bill Clinton hanging in the Smithsonian Institute of the National Portrait Gallery. Now, the only reason I have any idea about this is because I heard an interview with the artist on NPR, so this is where I got my information. But do you guys see that shadow to Clinton's right on the mantle? There's a shadow cast. We don't see what it's from. The artist says that shadow is the dress of Monica Lewinsky. After President Clinton left and the artist was continuing to do his work, he actually wheeled in a mannequin with a dress hung on it. Because in the artist's eyes, the scandal that rocked the American nation during Bill Clinton's presidency completely overshadowed everything else that he did as a statesman. And if you look really closely, it might be significant that in this portrait, Bill Clinton is not wearing his wedding ring. Little details make powerful statements for those who have eyes to see it. So Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Does anyone want to remind us about that story?
Yes.
All right, I got 125 pieces. You can just keep on going. Yes, go ahead.
And
Yeah.
And she dressed herself and she did whatever she did. And eventually, she also taught the father-in-law something that she's not all that sinful like he is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. All right. If you didn't catch it, this is one of those stories that most of us would like to whitewash out of our family histories. All right, but Tamar, the story is complicated, but she ends up dressing up like a prostitute and seducing her father-in-law, who gets her pregnant. And then she has twin boys, Perez and Zerah. And you thought your family history was messy and broken, okay? And Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Aminadab. Aminadab, the father of Nahshon. Let me go back to say, and the one thing about Tamar is Judah at the end of the story says, and she was more righteous than me. So, better than Judah, but this is a broken family story. All right, I got 2 pieces of candy for anyone who can tell me who Nahshon, the son of Aminadab, is. All right, well, I did say. Okay, if you didn't hear, he said Nahshon was the son of Aminadab. There you go. He was the leader of the tribe of Judah at the time of the Exodus. Oh, man, okay, you knew that? I got more candy that I'm going to give out this morning. So, Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Rahab, anyone? Canaanite, yes. In Jericho, yeah.
Not a reputable woman.
Not, delicately said, not a reputable woman. Yeah, a prostitute by trade. And yet who was remembered because she turned and put her faith in the Lord, the God of Israel. And she hid the Hebrew spies, and she is remembered and commemorated, and apparently she is included in this list. All right? Now Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Can anyone tell me about Ruth? Yes.
She took her mother, went with her mother to that land and helped provide for her.
That's right. I'm going to give you 3 so you can share with the people next to you, okay? Because we have a few people who know these stories well. All right, yeah, something about Ruth.
Ruth was determined to go with her mother-in-law, and I admire her determination of even walking and defending her mother-in-law, and then eventually even accepting to be married by Boaz to keep on the generation going.
Yeah. Yes.
She's also a Moabite who the Jews were not supposed to marry.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. Someone mentioned it. Yeah, she was... Yeah, she was not from the best crowd. I don't know that I can say that the kind of associations. Like if we were going to tell a modern day version of this, Ruth might be equivalent to a woman who worked in Las Vegas and the less reputable districts by reputation. The Moabites are a people who had their origins in an incestuous relationship between a father and his daughter, who then tried to curse the people of Israel in Numbers 22 through 24. And then in Numbers 25, the Moabite women show up and get a bunch of Israelite men to turn away from the Lord their God. And so Moses says in Deuteronomy 23, yeah, don't marry the Moabites. Any descendant of a Moabite is not even allowed into the assembly of God to the 10th generation. And all of a sudden, here's Ruth on the scene. And she is the only woman in the entire Old Testament who's called a virtuous woman. This woman's amazing because she puts her faith in the Lord, the God of Israel. All right. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. Now, if you didn't pay attention reading the book of Ruth, the genealogy at the end, that's the high point because from this woman's line comes King David. All right, who wants to share with me a positive story of King David? Let's start there.
He's a man after God's
A man after God's own heart, yes. You thought genealogies were boring. Snickers make them less so. All right, yes.
David was determined to see that people understand unless God is with you, you can never win any war.
That's right. Yeah. He put the whole Israelite nation to notice. Yes.
He tried to follow God's rules, and he did for a long time.
All right. Yeah. Here's a question for you. Was there any tall person that he fought? Giant. Named?
Goliath.
Yeah, there you go. Goliath. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, David fought Goliath, King David. This is huge. Oh, one more in the back.
He cared more about the Lord's glory than his own
He
reputation.
cared more about the Lord's glory than his own reputation. Luella. There you go. Yeah. We'll just pass this around when we're done. So, all right, King David. Good. And David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Okay. I'll go ahead and share this one. If you didn't know the story, in the words immortalized by Leonard Cohen, David one day saw her bathing on the roof, and her beauty in the moonlight overthrew him. Yes, sorry, way in the back. Yeah, yes. Good job, Theodore. Yeah, so David, he sees a beautiful woman who happens to be the wife of one of his most prized soldiers, the granddaughter of one of his most trusted advisors, and he sleeps with her, gets her pregnant, freaks out, and wonders how I'm going to hide it. So he calls her husband Uriah back home and saying, like, Uriah, maybe you want to go spend some time with your wife. But Uriah is more righteous than David. All right, he's a Hittite. He is a member of the Canaanite people who were supposed to be removed from the land of Canaan, who were evil, who God wanted to be gone. And yet here's this Hittite who cares more about the honor of God and the honor of the king than King David does. And it is actually Uriah's name included in the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah. As if Matthew, 1,000 years later, is giving Uriah a standing ovation. And Bathsheba, let's not forget her. Her story has a redemptive arc too, because her first son died, but her second son became Solomon, king of Israel. Of all David's wives and of all David's sons, this is the guy that God said, yeah, my plan is going to come through him. And David is the one that God said, one day, one of your descendants will rule over all the nations of the world and who will build me a house. So we're looking for a son of David. This is a pivotal chapter in Israelite history. All right, Solomon. Anyone? Okay, I have some of the same hands coming up, but yes, you and then you. Solomon, what?
He built God's temple and he asked for wisdom.
Yes, and?
Solomon was the wisest man. Who has gone to give him that wisdom apart from all other than Jesus?
Yeah, very, very wise. Absolutely, ask God for wisdom.
For all his wisdom, God gave him very foolish.
Yes, yeah, and very foolish. At the end of his life, he acquires women like property, a huge amount of gold, silver, and military forces, breaking every commandment that an Israelite king was supposed to follow. And at the end of his days, he's almost more like Pharaoh than he is like his father David. All right, let's speed things up here. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asa or Asaph, Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Jehoram, Jehoram the father of Uzziah, the father of Jotham, of Ahaz, and of Hezekiah. All right? This is all like people you read in 1st and 2nd Kings, and each of them with their own stories, but I will point out one of these details. Matthew feels like it's fine. He's going to skip 4 rulers over the nation of Judah. He skips, I forget it, I always forget. Is it Amaziah or Ahaziah? And then Athaliah, then Joash, and then the other one, Amaziah or Ahaziah. I get those two confused. All right? And we remember Hezekiah. Anyone remember the story of Hezekiah? All right. There was an Assyrian army that came and camped around the city of Jerusalem. Hezekiah prays and asks God to do something about it. And the angel of the Lord comes out and does what? Yeah, kills 185,000 people of the Assyrian army and rescues them. The Bible authors are very succinct, and they don't repeat stories often. So if a story is ever repeated twice, it's important. In Hezekiah's case, this story is actually repeated 3 times. Once in Kings, once in Isaiah, once in Chronicles. That should really get our attention. And should there be any person or story in the Bible that is ever told 4 times, like, say, at the beginning of the New Testament, it should make the rest of us get off our feet and go, what is going on here? I'm just saying. Now, as good as Hezekiah was, his son Manasseh was just as bad. And Manasseh was the father of Amon, Amon the father of Josiah, Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. All right, we skipped it. Let me just fill you in with the cracks. Most of these guys were terrible. All right? Some of them put their own brothers to death in order to keep their place on the throne secure. Some of them worshiped false gods, brought in idolatry, did a bunch of really terrible things. And some of them trusted in God, and that was really good. But this is a very sordid family history. And this downward spiral got so bad that God finally brought in the empire of Babylon and took the people out of the land to Babylon. At this point of the exile, there is no longer a king from the line of David. All of God's promises are like up in the air. Did you really mean it, God? Because we don't even have a king. So how is a king from the line of David ever going to rule over anything other than this pile of rubble that was once called Jerusalem? All right, there's Manasseh, there's Josiah, exile. And after the exile to Babylon, actually, I'm going to go back. One thing I want to say about Josiah. It's tough being Josiah, because when he hears about God's rules, he turns to God with all his heart. And God says, it doesn't matter how good you are, you cannot save Jerusalem from the destruction that's coming because what your dad did was so bad. But I'm going to wait until after you die. It's not going to come during your lifetime because you have turned to me. Like personal grace, but corporate national punishment. And after the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel. All right, this one's worth 2. Anyone know who Zerubbabel, father of Shealtiel, son of Shealtiel was? Why, yes.
Governor in Israel under the,
Yeah. Yep. His name means son in Babylon. He was the leader from the tribe of Judah. He would be the heir to the throne of David, but instead he is a ruler who leads the people back from exile and builds the temple of God recorded in Ezra chapter 1 through 4. All right. Now from Zerubbabel, he was the father of Abiud, the father of Eliakim, the father of Azor, the father of Zadok, the father of Akim, the father of Eliud, the father of Eleazar, the father of Mathan, the father of Jacob. I have this entire bag of candy. Can any of you guys tell me anything about those guys other than, they were the son of their dad?
Jacob is the father of Joseph, who was husband to Mary.
I should be a little bit more clear on that one. And the reason I offered the bag of candy is because we don't know who any of these people are from the Old Testament. Matthew is tracing the genealogies he had access to in the first century. We don't currently have those. But Jacob is the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. And Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. All right, Joseph is not even Jesus' bio dad, but Jesus still is the one who will inherit the throne of David. All right, Jesus is the fulfillment of this whole story, of this entire Old Testament that we've been reading for a very, very long time. All right, of thousands of years of Jewish history, Matthew says Jesus is the one who came to fulfill all of this. All right, so there's Mary. Thus, there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. All right, so what's the deal with 14? Because apparently this is a detail Matthew thinks is really important. And unfortunately for you, and unfortunately for me, Matthew doesn't explain himself. He's a Bible nerd who just kind of leaves it hanging there, wondering, what are we going to figure out? And unfortunately, guys, I don't know. I've got 3 good options for you. All right, and you can pick your favorite. One of the first explanations is that Matthew, through the use of 14, is doing something called gematria, all right? It is this idea of associating letters with numbers. And in English, if you go back far enough, we used to do this. Once upon a time, you would open up a book, say 75 years ago, and you would read, turn to page XVIII. Carolyn, can you pronounce that last word in that sentence for me? Yeah, I don't know what that would sound like either. This is not actually a word. Those letters represent numbers. So X is 10, V is 5, and I is 1. So that is actually the equivalent of saying turn to page 18. In Hebrew, we have much the same. And if you take the number 14, and if you take the name David, you'll realize that the consonants of David's name, DWD, are 464, add up to the number 14. So it could be that Matthew's trying to say, yeah, Jesus is the David who was to come. 14, 14, 14. Or it could be that, 14 is a multiple of 7, and we went through the Torah. 7 is a huge deal in the Bible. And so 42 generations is the equivalent to 6 times 7. As if Matthew's saying the 7th 7 is on its way. The culmination, the fulfillment of all that God is doing in human history is on its way, and it's coming through Jesus. Could be. Or maybe Matthew's just saying that Jesus is the next chapter in the storyline. All right, in the story of humanity, Abraham was a pivotal moment because now, through one person, God is bringing about the promised restoration of all things. Okay, everything wrong in the world, God says, I'm going to bring the solution through Abraham's family. And 14 generations later, we get to King David, and all of a sudden, this is a new moment because God says, I'm going to bring the restoration of all things and the promise to Abraham through the line of David. And then we get to the exile, when everything smashes into a million pieces, and we wonder if God will actually keep his promises and if all is lost. And 14 generations later, Jesus shows up on the scene. All right, God is keeping his promises. He's doing everything right. So whether or not any of those or all of those together is the explanation, Matthew thinks 14 is a big deal. And for the rest of you, you can say, oh, I guess I can just remember the number 14. Good enough. All right. So what do you do with the genealogy? One is Matthew wants us to see that Jesus is the Christ, and we will have a lot to explore about what that title means as we move through this gospel. He's the son of David, all right, the promised king. And we didn't get to the book of Isaiah during our preaching series, but here's Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. For to us a child is born, and to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he, this child, will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. And he will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. If you don't know the context, all right, this is Isaiah talking to a king of the people of Judah, surrounded by enemies who want to bring Judah down. So how do you handle a military force at your gates? Isaiah says, don't worry, trust God. He's got it all under control. And you know what? Here's what he's going to do one day. He's bringing a kid. It's an interesting salvation plan. But this kid will be called Mighty God. This king will reign on David's throne forever. And Matthew's saying, Jesus, this guy that I'm about to introduce you to, he's the one we were waiting for. Jesus is the son of Abraham. He's the one through whom all the peoples on earth will be blessed. Jesus comes through a very broken family. Now, this is me reflecting on the genealogy for you and I to think about this morning. All right? If you thought my story was broken, let me tell you what, just like read those 500 pages of Israelite history. Like, these guys were messed up. He comes through a very broken family. But Jesus is the expected, unexpected culmination of the broken and redemptive story of Israel and the fulfillment of God's promises. All right, let me break that down because that's a mouthful. We were waiting for Jesus. We were waiting for God to keep his promises. We were waiting for the Messiah. Guess what? He came. But he came in ways we weren't looking for, through Gentiles and through Hittite soldiers and Canaanite women. And he's the culmination of the story of Israel, a story that is very broken, but also very redemptive. He's a fulfillment of God's promises. Everything hinges on Jesus. Israel's story hinges on Jesus, and so does mine. And if you will let it, so will yours. And so as we come to the book of Matthew, I'll be saying this all year long, so let me just warn you in advance, but investigate Jesus and recognize him for who he is, because the claims that are made about this person will change your life one way or the other. It is argued that the most important decision we can make as people is to say who Jesus is for us. Because he wasn't just a good teacher. Because no good teacher would say the kind of crazy things that Jesus says. Either he is who he says he is, or he's a liar. And either we are the smartest people on the planet because we're actually listening to what God has to say about Jesus, or we are idiots to be pitied. I think those are really the only two options. I think this morning I want to encourage us to praise God for keeping his promises despite the people that he had to work with. All right, thank God for YouTube. I love YouTube videos. And there's a whole subset of YouTube videos created about really good artisans making cool stuff out of total junk. Watch as I take these 3 rusty ball bearings and make them into a Craftsman Damascus kitchen knife. And you're like, that's really cool. watch as I take the ordinary ingredients you can find at your local grocery store and make this beautiful cake. And we're like, oh, that's really cool. Watch as I take a bunch of colored pencils and a bunch of epoxy and I turn it into this master table craftsman, sculpture of a bear. And you're like, I don't know that is worth the effort. But again, that is really cool, okay? Like sometimes the sign of a craftsman is what they can do with stuff like that. And we look at the story of Israel and we're like, man, Israel, you're no good, but your God is very good because look at what he's doing through a bunch of people like that. And so we can rest securely in God, no matter how broken our stories are, because God has done more with worse than you and with worse than me. And so this morning, I want to encourage you to do an activity with me really quickly. We're going to draw our own little personal family trees. See, near you, there should be a blue piece of paper and a pen. I'm just going to give you a couple minutes. I just want to quickly sketch out your family tree as far back as you want to go, and you can do so quickly. All right, and then just start remembering. Remember the good, remember the bad. Remember that awesome time that person did something amazing, and then remember the arguments and the fights and the alcoholism and the broken relationships as well. And just reflect on it for a second. And then culminate in yourself and give yourself some space to the right of you. So hopefully that makes sense. Quick family tree. Remember a few details of the story along the way. Give yourself space to right next to you. All right, and I'll be back in 2 minutes. Good luck. Yeah, I know. This one works. Give you about 30 seconds more. All right. Sorry to rush you on a genealogy. Feel free to take as much time with that later as you want. I don't know what your stories involve. My family stories involve alcoholism and recovering from alcohol, infidelity and profound faithfulness, people who got really, really angry and drove their kids away, and people who hung on despite all the brokenness in their family, and years later were able to reconcile and redeem. My own life felt like everything had been handed to me, and I told you, I started this morning telling you the story of how everything in my life fell apart. I don't know how broken your story is, but I did tell you to leave a blank next to you, because here's the thing. Jesus is the answer to the story of Israel. He's the answer to our stories. So next to you, I want you to write this. Write your name, or me, so I'd say Jordan, who is saved by grace through faith, and whose story has a happy ending because of Jesus. Kevin, who was saved by grace through faith, and whose story has a happy ending because of Jesus. Eric, Joe, Tony, Jennifer, saved by grace through faith, whose story has a happy ending because of Jesus. I'm told the Japanese have a craft where they take broken ceramics and then they repair them with gold, silver, or platinum. Called, is it kintsugi? Is that, I don't know. That's the English Wikipedia spelling. So, no idea. The idea that something could be even more precious after it was broken because of what filled in the cracks. See, this morning, I'm praising Jesus because he brings my story to a happy ending. I talked to a woman on this back stairwell in our parking lot. You might recognize that a couple days ago. She was telling me about what kept her on the streets, about the drugs that have control over her life, and about how the fact that her family member wants her to come home, and she can't. She can't come home because to come home would be to admit failure. And even though she knows that she has failed in life, she can't bring herself to walk into that, to own that label. I laughed at her. It wasn't my most tactful moment. But I laughed at her because I'm like, were you listening? Like I was just practicing for my sermon on Sunday. And I'm beginning it with the line that the greatest moment of my life was the day I decided I didn't want to live anymore. And she went, what? And I said, yeah, I failed. I own that. And me owning my failure was the start of God doing something quite unique and amazing in my story. And he saved my story. And he can save yours too. Now, unfortunately, she ended with saying, I'll have to think about it. Oh, guys, don't think about it. Go. Run to Jesus. Run to help. Make whatever change you need to make and start today. But this morning, I want to thank God for Jesus who came to save our broken stories and to fill the cracks of our life with his glorious presence. It will end in happiness. I don't know how much more brokenness we will encounter along the way. But because of Jesus, Israel's story has a happy ending. Because of Jesus, my story has a happy ending. And if you're in Jesus, so does yours. Praise God. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you, God, for your goodness and your word, for chocolate and for community. God, thank you for the stories of our life that are broken and that you have repaired. And God, thank you for the stories of our life that are still broken. And I'm just saying that in faith, God, because I believe that through your Son, what is broken will one day be mended. And the things in the world that are so wrong will one day be answered with justice and righteousness and peace. God, I've seen some of what you can do through Jesus. I've seen some of the salvation that he has brought. I'm eager to see a lot more. And so, Father, when we encounter the brokenness in our own lives and in the lives of those around us, may we remember that your Son has come to answer that with his life. That he is the King of the world, your Christ, the fulfillment of all your promises, and that we are to wait and hope in him, because one day he's going to come. And he's going to fill this broken world with his glory and with justice and righteousness forever. And that'll be something worth seeing. So God, thank you for a story. Thank you for Matthew. And would you just prepare our hearts this coming year as we encounter more of the story of your Son to respond in faith and hope and love and in obedience for your glory and for our good forever. Amen.